My name is Thomas Richter, and I drive. Not just any driving, mind you. I haul. I haul things most people wouldn't even want to look at, let alone transport across state lines. I work for a subcontractor, a shell company really, that provides logistical support for what they vaguely call sensitive materials. The paperwork is always vague, the destinations are always remote, and the pay is always ridiculously good. My route this week took me from a nondescript warehouse in the industrial outskirts of Gary, Indiana, heading towards a facility nestled deep within the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. The cargo? 3 large, reinforced steel containers. Each one was sealed, numbered, and equipped with a series of blinking lights and temperature gauges. The manifest simply listed them as Project Nightingale components. The rules were strict, almost paranoid. No stopping except at designated checkpoints. No opening the cargo bay under any circumstances. No deviating from the prescribed route. And most importantly, no asking questions. I've been doing this for almost 5 years, and I've learned that curiosity is a dangerous luxury in this line of work. The containers hummed with a low, resonant frequency, a constant thrumming that vibrated through the truck's chassis and into my bones. The temperature gauges flickered between 42 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit, the lights blinking in a sequence I couldn't decipher. The silence of the Indiana backroads was broken only by the engine's drone and the rhythmic hum of the cargo. As I crossed the state line into Ohio, a sense of unease settled over me. It wasn't the usual paranoia that came with the job. It was something different, something heavier. The air felt thick, the shadows seemed to deepen, and the hum of the containers grew louder, more insistent. I checked the mirrors, scanned the road ahead, but there was nothing, just the endless ribbon of asphalt, the desolate landscape, and the growing sense that I was carrying something profoundly wrong. The first checkpoint was a deserted gas station just outside Youngstown, Ohio. The instructions were precise. Park behind the station, leave the engine running, and wait inside the diner for further instructions. The diner was a relic of the 50s, a chrome and vinyl time capsule with faded booths and a cracked linoleum floor. The only other occupant was a grizzled old man behind the counter, his eyes narrowed as he watched me enter. "Coffee," I mumbled, taking a seat at the counter. The old man grunted, pouring a cup of what looked like motor oil and sliding it across. I took a sip, grimacing at the bitter taste. "You one of them haulers?" the old man asked, his voice raspy. I nodded, not wanting to engage in conversation. "They come through here all the time," he continued, oblivious to my reticence. "Hauling all sorts of strange things. Never seen nothing like it." I remained silent, sipping my coffee and trying to ignore the old man's rambling. He talked about the strange trucks, the unmarked containers, the men in black suits who always accompanied them. He spoke of whispers and rumors, of government conspiracies and things best left undisturbed. "You ever seen what's inside them containers?" he asked, leaning closer. I shook my head, my grip tightening on the coffee cup. "You don't want to know," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Things ain't natural, things that shouldn't be." I finished my coffee, paid the man, and returned to the truck. The containers were still humming, their lights blinking in the twilight. I climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled out onto the highway. The old man's words echoed in my mind, fueling the unease that had been growing since I left Gary. As I drove, I noticed a black SUV following me. It kept a steady distance, its headlights barely visible in my rearview mirror. I tried to shake it off, taking a detour through a small town, but it stayed with me. The SUV was unmarked, its windows tinted, and I couldn't see who was inside. The road wound through the foothills of the Appalachians, the landscape growing increasingly desolate. The sun had set, and the only light came from the truck's headlights and the occasional farmhouse in the distance. The black SUV was still behind me, a silent shadow in the darkness. I reached the second checkpoint, a lonely rest stop on the edge of the Allegheny National Forest. The instructions were the same: park, leave the engine running, and wait. The rest stop was deserted, the only sound the wind whistling through the trees. I sat in the cab, the hum of the containers a constant presence. The black SUV parked a discreet distance away. Something was wrong. The unease had blossomed into full-blown fear. The old man's words, the black SUV, the strange cargo. It all added up to a sense of dread that I couldn't shake off. I considered calling my dispatcher, but I knew it was pointless. They wouldn't tell me anything, and they'd probably just warn me about violating the no questions rule. As I sat there, the lights on the containers began to blink faster, the hum growing louder. The temperature gauges spiked, the needles hitting the red zone. I felt a surge of panic, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached for the radio, but before I could call for help, the black SUV pulled up alongside my truck. The headlights of the SUV, a black Ford Expedition, blinded me momentarily. A tall, slender figure emerged from the driver's side, his movements precise and deliberate. He wore a dark, tailored suit, the fabric reflecting the dim light of the rest stop. His face was hidden in the shadows, cast by the brim of a fedora. He moved with an unnerving grace, a predator stalking its prey. "Open the cargo bay, Mr. Richter," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that sent a shiver down my spine. There was no room for argument, no hint of negotiation, just a cold, hard command. My fingers trembled as I reached for the release lever, the metal cool and slick beneath my touch. The hydraulic hiss of the cargo bay doors opening echoed through the desolate rest stop, the sound amplified by the oppressive silence. The 3 steel containers, bathed in the pale glow of the rest stop's security lights, stood like monolithic sentinels, their blinking lights casting an eerie glow. The temperature gauges, which had been spiking wildly, now seemed to fluctuate erratically. The man stepped closer, his eyes scanning the containers with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He pulled a small metallic device from his pocket, its surface gleaming in the dim light. It resembled a remote control, but its purpose was far more sinister. He pressed a button, and the device emitted a series of high-pitched, rhythmic beeps. The containers responded immediately, their lights flashing in a synchronized pattern, the humming sound intensifying. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the words lost in the hum of the containers. He ignored me, his attention fixed on the device and the containers. He pressed another button, and the beeping frequency changed, becoming a low, resonant drone. The lights on the containers dimmed, and the humming sound subsided, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the steel containers. The temperature gauges began to plummet, the needles swinging wildly towards the freezing point. "What is this place?" I demanded, my voice rising in panic. "What are you doing to those things?" He finally turned to face me, his face still obscured by the shadows. "This is a designated containment area, Mr. Richter," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We are conducting essential maintenance." "Maintenance?" I scoffed. They were going crazy. The temperature was off the charts. "An anomaly," he stated simply. "A temporary fluctuation. Now, they are stabilized." "Stabilized?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "What are they? What's inside?" He paused, his eyes piercing the darkness between us. "That, Mr. Richter, is beyond your clearance." He turned back to the containers, pressing another button on the device. The growling sound ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence. The temperature gauges stabilized, the needles hovering just above freezing. The lights on the containers pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat. "You have violated protocol, Mr. Richter," he said, his voice cold and hard. "You have asked questions that should not be asked." He pocketed the device and turned to leave, his movements as fluid and silent as a wraith. He paused by the door of the SUV, glancing back at me. "Consider this a final warning," he said, his voice barely audible above the wind whistling through the trees. "Continue on your route, and do not deviate, do not stop, and most importantly, Mr. Richter, do not ask any more questions." He slid into the SUV, the engine roaring to life. The vehicle pulled away, its headlights cutting through the darkness, disappearing into the winding road that led deeper into the Allegheny National Forest. I stood there, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. The containers stood silent, their lights pulsing like the heartbeat of some monstrous creature. The man's words echoed in my ears. "Beyond your clearance." What was beyond my clearance? What secrets were hidden within those steel containers? And what horrors awaited me further down the road? The rest stop felt colder now, the air thick with an oppressive silence that was far more unsettling than the humming of the containers. I climbed back into the cab, my hand shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 2:17 a.m. I had been there for almost an hour that felt like an eternity. I checked the mirrors, but the black SUV was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that eyes were peering at me from the shadows of the surrounding forest. I started the engine, the roar of the diesel a welcome sound in the unnerving quiet. I pulled back onto the highway, heading deeper into the Allegheny National Forest. The road twisted and turned, climbing higher into the hills. The forest pressed in on either side, a dense, impenetrable wall of trees. The headlights of my truck cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow strip of asphalt ahead. The only other signs of civilization were the occasional dilapidated farmhouses, their windows dark and lifeless. As I drove, my mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened. What were those containers? What was the facility in the forest? And who was that man in the black suit? The more I thought about it, the more questions I had, and the fewer answers. I tried to focus on the road, to push the unsettling thoughts from my mind. But it was no use. The image of the man in the black suit, the eerie silence of the containers, the feeling of being watched. It all haunted me, clinging to my thoughts like a persistent nightmare. The temperature gauges on the containers remained stable, hovering just above freezing. The lights continued to pulse, a slow, rhythmic beat that seemed to mock me. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the black SUV reappear, but the road behind me was empty. Suddenly, the truck began to shudder, the steering wheel vibrating in my hands. I gripped it tightly, trying to maintain control as the truck lurched violently. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I climbed out of the cab, my legs unsteady. I walked around the truck, inspecting the tires, but they seemed fine. I checked under the hood, but everything looked normal. The engine was running smoothly, but the shuddering persisted. A low, ominous rumble that seemed to emanate from the cargo bay. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the release lever. The man in the black suit's warning echoed in my mind. Do not open the cargo bay under any circumstances. But I couldn't ignore the shuddering, the feeling that something was terribly wrong with the cargo. I took a deep breath and pulled the lever, The doors hissed open, revealing the 3 steel containers. The lights were still pulsing, but now they seemed to flicker, as if struggling to maintain their rhythm. The temperature gauges were fluctuating again, the needles dancing wildly. As I stared at the containers, a low guttural growl emanated from within. It was the same sound I had heard at the rest stop, but now it was louder, more menacing. The containers began to shake violently, the steel groaning under the strain. I stumbled back, my eyes wide with terror. Something was inside those containers, something alive, and it was trying to get out. The growling intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The containers shook violently, the lights flashing erratically. Suddenly, one of the containers exploded, the steel rupturing with a deafening crash. A cloud of vapor billowed out, filling the cargo bay. I shielded my eyes, my ears ringing from the explosion. As the vapor cleared, I saw it, a monstrous shape, writhing and thrashing inside the ruined container. It was huge, its form shifting and indistinct, its skin glistening in the dim light. It let out a deafening shriek, a sound that pierced my very soul. I turned and ran, my legs pumping, my heart pounding. I didn't stop running until I reached the cab of the truck. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine. I threw the truck into gear and sped away, leaving the monstrous shape and the ruined container behind. I drove blindly, my mind numb with terror. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away, as far away as possible from the horrors I had just witnessed. The truck sped through the darkness, the headlights cutting through the night. The image of the monstrous shape burned into my mind. The truck hurtled down the highway, the speedometer needle hovering just below the red line. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The image of the monstrous shape, its shriek still ringing in my ears, was burned into my mind. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it chasing me, but the road behind was empty. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away, as far away as possible from the horrors I had witnessed. The forest gave way to rolling hills, then to open farmland. The sky began to lighten, the first rays of dawn painting the horizon with streaks of orange and pink. As the sun rose, my panic began to subside, replaced by a cold, gnawing fear. What had I done? I had violated the rules, opened the cargo bay, and unleashed something terrible. I was sure the man in the black suit would be looking for me, and I had no doubt he would find me. I needed to find a place to hide, to think, to figure out what to do next. I spotted a small town in the distance, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley. I turned off the highway, heading towards the town, hoping to find some refuge. The town was called Harmony, a quaint, peaceful place with a main street lined with shops and houses. It seemed untouched by the horrors I had just experienced, a world away from the monstrous shape and the ruined container. I parked the truck on a side street, trying to make it look inconspicuous. I climbed out of the cab, my legs still shaky. I walked towards the main street, my eyes scanning the faces of the people I passed, looking for any sign of suspicion. The people of Harmony seemed friendly enough, smiling and nodding as I walked by, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an outsider, that they could sense the darkness I carried with me. I found a small diner, a cozy place with checkered floors and red vinyl booths. I went inside, hoping to find some anonymity. The diner was nearly empty, just a few locals sipping coffee and reading newspapers. I sat at a booth in the back, ordering a coffee and a breakfast sandwich. As I ate, I tried to calm my racing thoughts, to formulate a plan, but my mind was a jumble of fear and confusion. Suddenly, the diner door opened, and a man in a black suit walked in. My heart leaped into my throat. It wasn't the same man from the rest stop. but he had the same cold, calculating eyes, the same air of authority. He scanned the diner, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. Then he walked to the counter, ordering the coffee. He didn't look at me again, but I knew he knew I was there. I finished my breakfast, my appetite gone. I paid the bill and left the diner, trying to act casual. I walked back to the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the truck, the man in the black suit emerged from the diner. He walked towards me, his footsteps echoing on the quiet street. "Mr. Richter," he said, his voice cold and even. "We need to talk." The man in the black suit, his face impassive, his eyes like chips of ice, was walking toward me. Harmony, the name of this town, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. There was no harmony here, just the looming threat of the man and the chilling memory of what I had unleashed. "Mr. Richter," he said, his voice a low, even cadence that belied the danger I felt radiating from him. "We need to talk." I swallowed hard, trying to project an air of calm I was far from feeling. "About what?" I asked, my voice betraying my fear, with a slight tremor. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze unwavering. "About your deviation from the established protocol," he said, the words carefully chosen, each one a sharp, precise blade. "I had a malfunction," I said, trying to sound convincing. "The truck was shuddering. The containers were overheating. I had to check it out." He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that seemed to amplify his menace. "And in doing so, you compromised the integrity of the cargo." "One of the containers ruptured," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, as if this was the expected outcome. "I am aware, and I am also aware of what you saw." My heart pounded in my chest. He knew. He knew what I had seen, what I had unleashed. What was it?" I asked, the question escaping my lips before I could stop it. He didn't answer directly. "That, Mr. Richter, is classified, but let's just say it was a necessary component of our research." "Research?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You call that research?" It was a monster. He remained impassive. "Perspective, Mr. Richter. It is all a matter of perspective. Now, about your indiscretion. It has created a situation." "What kind of situation?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "A situation that requires resolution," he said, his voice still even, but with an underlying edge of steel. "And you, Mr. Richter, are instrumental in that resolution." He pulled a small silver card from his pocket and handed it to me. "Be at this address by noon," he said. "We will discuss the details then." The card was blank, except for a single address printed in stark black letters. 147 Ravenwood Drive, Blackwood, Pennsylvania. He turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the diner, leaving me standing there, the card clutched in my trembling hand. I looked at the address, a shiver running down my spine. Blackwood. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, a place where nightmares were born. I knew I had no choice. I had to go. I had unleashed something terrible, and now I had to face the consequences. But I also knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was just the beginning. The man in the black suit, the monstrous shape, the secrets hidden in the steel containers, they were all part of something far bigger, far more terrifying than I could possibly imagine. I got back in the truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely insert the key into the ignition. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, heading east, towards Blackwood, towards the unknown. The drive was a blur. My mind was racing, replaying the events of the past few hours, trying to piece together the puzzle. But the pieces didn't fit. The picture remained fragmented and terrifying. As I drove, I noticed something strange in the sky. A flock of black birds, crows or ravens, was circling overhead, their cries echoing through the air. They seemed to be following me, their dark shapes silhouetted against the morning sky. I tried to ignore them, but they persisted, their presence growing more and more ominous. They were like a dark omen, a harbinger of the horrors that awaited me in Blackwood. The address led me to a secluded mansion, its dark stone walls and imposing gate radiating an aura of cold menace. The flock of birds had followed me, circling above the mansion, like vultures awaiting a feast. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was walking into a trap. But I had no choice. I had to face whatever awaited me inside. The wrought iron gates of the Blackwood mansion loomed before me, their intricate design a mockery of the dread twisting in my gut. I pulled the truck up to the gate, the engine sputtering to a stop as if the vehicle itself sensed the malevolence emanating from the place. The gates swung open with a groan, as if inviting me into the jaws of some unseen beast. I drove slowly up the long, winding driveway, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The mansion grew larger with each passing moment, its dark windows like vacant eyes staring down at me. The flock of birds, their numbers seemingly doubled, continued to circle overhead, their raucous cries a chilling soundtrack to my arrival. I parked the truck in front of the imposing oak doors and stepped out, the air thick with an oppressive silence that was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the calling of the birds. I walked towards the doors, my footsteps echoing across the stone facade. Before I could reach for the knocker, the doors swung open, revealing a dimly lit foyer. A tall, slender figure stood in the shadows, his face obscured by the gloom. "Mr. Richter," he said, his voice a familiar baritone. "Welcome." It was the man from the rest stop, the man with the silver device. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn and run, but I knew there was no escape. I stepped into the foyer, the doors closing behind me with a heavy thud. The air inside was cold and stale, with a faint metallic scent that made my stomach churn. The man led me down a long, dimly lit hallway, the walls lined with portraits of stern-faced individuals who seemed to follow me with their eyes. We reached a heavy oak door at the end of the hallway. The man opened it, revealing a large, opulent study. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the book-lined walls. A man sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his back to me. "Mr. Richter," he said, his voice a deep, resonant bass. "Please have a seat." I sat in a leather armchair facing the desk, my heart pounding in my chest. The man swiveled in his chair, revealing a face that was both familiar and unsettling. He was older than the man from the rest stop, his hair silvered at the temples, but his eyes held the same cold, calculating glint. "I am Dr. Alistair Crane," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, "and I believe you have something that belongs to me." I don't understand," I stammered. "The container, Mr. Richter," he said, his voice hardening. "The one that ruptured. It contained a valuable specimen, and I want it back." "But it's gone," I said. "It escaped." Dr. Crane leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "I assure you, Mr. Richter, it cannot have gone far. It is bound to this area. And you, Mr. Richter, are going to help me find it." "Me?" I said, my voice rising in panic. "But I don't know how." "You will learn," Dr. Crane said, a chilling smile spreading across his lips. "You will learn very quickly." He stood up, walked to a bookshelf, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound volume. He handed it to me. This will tell you everything you need to know, he said. Read it carefully, Mr. Richter. Your life depends on it. The book was titled The Malleus Maleficarum, and its pages were filled with strange symbols and arcane rituals. I opened it, my eyes scanning the text, a sense of dread washing over me. What is this? I asked, my voice trembling. A guide, Mr. Richter, Dr. Crane said, his smile widening. A guide to hunting, the unnatural. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The creature you unleashed is not of this world, Mr. Richter. It is something ancient, something evil. And you, Mr. Richter, are going to help me send it back to the hell from which it came. The Malleus Maleficarum. The very title sent shivers down my spine. The book felt heavy in my hands, the leather worn smooth with age, the pages brittle and yellowed. I flipped through it, the strange symbols and arcane text swimming before my eyes. It was a witch hunter's manual, a relic from a darker time, a time when fear and superstition ruled the world. Dr. Crane watched me, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. It is an ancient text, Mr. Richter, he said, his voice a low, hypnotic drone. A compendium of knowledge about the unnatural. It will teach you how to identify, track, and ultimately destroy the creature you unleashed. Destroy? I echoed, the word catching in my throat. The image of the creature, its monstrous form, its deafening shriek, flashed through my mind. Could something like that truly be destroyed? It will not be easy, Mr. Richter, Dr. Crane continued, his voice taking on a pedagogical tone. The creature is powerful, cunning, and elusive, but with the knowledge contained within this book, and with my guidance, you will succeed. He gestured towards a table in the corner of the study. There are supplies you will need, he said. Weapons, tools, protective charms. Familiarize yourself with them. We begin our hunt at nightfall. I approached the table, my legs feeling heavy and leaden. Laid out on the polished surface was an array of items that seemed more suited to a medieval torture chamber than a modern-day hunt. There were silver daggers, vials filled with strange liquids, intricately carved wooden symbols, and a heavy, iron-wrought net. My stomach churned as I picked up one of the daggers, its blade cold and sharp against my skin. What have I gotten myself into? This wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself. I was a truck driver for God's sake, not a monster hunter. Dr. Crane seemed to sense my apprehension. Do not be afraid, Mr. Richter, he said, his voice soothing, almost paternal. You are not alone in this. I will be with you every step of the way, and together we will rid the world of this abomination. His words offered little comfort. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game with stakes far higher than I could comprehend. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation and instruction. Dr. Crane drilled me on the contents of the Malleus Maleficarum, explaining the creature's weaknesses, its vulnerabilities, its patterns of behavior. He taught me how to use the weapons and tools, how to decipher the symbols, how to perform the rituals. As the sun began to set, a sense of dread settled over me. The hunt was about to begin, and I felt woefully unprepared. I was armed with ancient knowledge, medieval weapons, and a desperate hope that I would survive the night. Dr. Crane led me out of the mansion and into the surrounding woods. The flock of birds, their numbers now legion, followed us, their cries echoing through the trees. The forest seemed to press in on us, the shadows deepening, the air growing thick with an oppressive silence. The creature is drawn to places of darkness and despair, Dr. Crane explained, his voice barely a whisper. It feeds on fear and suffering. We must be vigilant, Mr. Richter. It could be anywhere. walked for what seemed like hours, the forest growing darker, the silence more profound. The only sounds were the crunching of leaves beneath our feet and the occasional rustle in the undergrowth. Suddenly, Dr. Crane stopped, his hand raised. "There," he whispered, pointing towards a clearing ahead. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. In the center of the clearing stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and lifeless. "That is where it is hiding," Dr. Crane said, his voice grin. "Be prepared, Mr. Richter. This is where the true test begins." He handed me a silver dagger and a vial filled with a viscous silver liquid. "This will protect you," he said. "Use them wisely." I gripped the dagger and the vial, my knuckles white. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. I knew that what awaited me in that cabin was something beyond my comprehension, something that would challenge my sanity and test my courage. But I had no choice. I had unleashed this creature, and now I had to face it. The cabin door creaked open, revealing a scene of utter devastation. The interior was a shambles, furniture overturned, walls clawed and gouged. The air was thick with the stench of decay and a lingering sense of malevolence. Dr. Crane and I cautiously entered, our weapons drawn. The creature was gone, but its presence lingered, a palpable sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. We searched the cabin, finding nothing but signs of the creature's passage. Shredded clothing, pools of viscous fluid, and strange, unidentifiable markings on the walls. "It's gone," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Crane nodded grimly. "It has fled, but it will return. These creatures are drawn to places of darkness and despair. It will seek out new victims, new sources of fear." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We continue the hunt, Mr. Richter," Dr. Crane said, his eyes gleaming with a renewed intensity. "We will track it, we will find it, and we will destroy it. It is our duty, our responsibility." We left the cabin, the flock of birds still circling overhead, their cries a constant reminder of the evil that lurked in the shadows. We returned to the mansion, exhausted and shaken, but determined to continue our quest. The following days were a blur of research, preparation, and relentless hunting. We followed the creature's trail, tracking it through the forests and hills of Pennsylvania. We consulted ancient texts, performed arcane rituals, and battled creatures of darkness that seemed to emerge from the very depths of hell. Slowly, we began to learn more about the creature, its weaknesses, its vulnerabilities. We discovered that it was bound to a specific location, a place of immense suffering and despair. We learned that it could be harmed by silver, by certain herbs, and by the power of faith. Finally, after weeks of relentless pursuit, we cornered the creature in an abandoned church, a place steeped in darkness and despair. The battle was fierce, a terrifying clash between the forces of good and evil. But in the end, with the knowledge gained from the Malleus Maleficarum and the courage born of desperation, we prevailed. The creature was vanquished, its monstrous form dissolving into dust, its shriek silenced forever. We had won, but the victory felt hollow. We had faced the darkness, and we had survived, but we had also been forever changed. I returned to my life, but I was no longer the same man. I carried the memory of the creature, the knowledge of the darkness that lurked in the shadows, and the burden of the responsibility to protect the world from the horrors that lay beyond human comprehension. I still drive, I still haul, but now I know that I am carrying more than just cargo. I am carrying a secret, a burden, and a responsibility that will stay with me for the rest of my days.